Everyone currently has the exact same mindset, but what if I told you that this mindset is one of, if not the worst mindset you can have? Now you're probably wondering, what makes this the worst mindset? And more importantly, how can we get rid of it? Well, that's what we're going to answer in this video. So what is this mindset? Around 2 years ago, back in high school, I had a music class. This was one of my favorite classes, as I would dedicate a lot of my time to practicing for the class. But what makes this class so interesting was something that I had observed. When I compared every other music class to mine, I noticed that they're all way better. Why? Well, the more I looked into my own class, the more I realized a common pattern. You see, I had learned 3 instruments in the span of 5 years, but when you compare it to everyone else in my class, not only did they stick with one instrument, throughout the 5 years that they were practicing the instrument, the amount of progress they made was very little. What was holding them back? Well, the thing that was stopping them from making magnificent progress is something I call the risk aversion pleasure mindset. The risk aversion pleasure mindset is basically the mindset that rewards avoiding action in favor of pleasure. Allow me to explain. You've probably met that one guy. He spends his time endlessly gaming. However, he has very low grades. The reason his grades are so poor is down to the fact that in his mind, he favors the pleasure of gaming over productive risks. So what do I mean by productive risks? Well, with my music class, most of them had this mindset. They were so disinterested to their own instruments. But it wasn't like they had any hobbies either. When you look at their lives, they spent every hour consuming mindless pleasure, like TikTok, Snapchat, Netflix, YouTube. But here's the thing, they were so sucked into their pleasures that they didn't want to practice their own instrument, making them an example of avoiding risk-taking in favor of pleasure. But what really freaked me out about this mindset was the sheer amount of people who had it. What if I told you that 95% of the people I graduated with all sacrificed long-term results for short-term pleasures? But things get even worse when you start to realize the implications of this mindset. So the first thing this mindset will do to you is that, remember the NEET movement? If you're unaware, NEET essentially means someone who's unemployed. Now, there are many reasons for unemployment, but what made this movement so interesting was that normally, if you are unemployed, it's because you're struggling to get a job. But with these people, that wasn't why they were NEETs. Instead, being unemployed was a part of their identity. Why were they embracing being unemployed? That sounds so dumb. Well, the reason why they considered themselves NEETs was because when you look at what they were trying to do, the goal was to label themselves as unemployed, discredit work, and use the label so they can avoid risk-taking in favor of their own pleasures. This is the risk-averse pleasure mindset in action. But it doesn't end there. Now imagine that one day, the NEET's family is struggling. They lose their middle-class status and they become lower class. The mother demands the NEET's son that he has to take action. He has to get a job, or otherwise they might get evicted. This sounds threatening enough for any son to want to take action. But with this mindset, the NEET has never felt so much discomfort in his life. So what does he do? He rejects getting a job. And if you don't believe me that this stuff happens, I know so many people who are adults and they haven't gotten themselves a good income. And with some of these people, even though their life is starting to become more dire by the second, they don't care. They are like a frog in boiling water. But we're only scratching the surface. This next part is what truly makes this mindset so terrifying. I want you to imagine for a second that you have just turned 30. This is a time where people usually look back on their life and how they spent it. For a high achiever, they would usually look back with gratitude for what they have accomplished in their 20s. But what if throughout your young adult life, you had this mindset and it caused you to endlessly pursue pleasure and ignore risk-taking? You don't get a high-end job, you don't aim for greatness, you don't start a business or whatever. You just spend your entire young adult life consuming. But then you hit 30. How do you think you'll look back? This is a question I want you to answer because hitting 30 is synonymous with what's called a midlife crisis. But why are we talking about a midlife crisis? Well, when people hit 20 years old, this is when they usually start to have fun. They go to parties, they drink a bunch, they waste every day to hedonic pleasures. But when you have this mindset, the risk-averse pleasure mindset, this becomes a massive problem. You see, with this mindset, because of how it works, when you spend your 20s hedonically, you won't grow out of it. Instead, it'll cause you to endlessly consume until eventually, when you hit 30, you'll realize that you just wasted the last 10 years of your life and you can't get them back. But here's the thing, the more time that was wasted, the worse the midlife crisis will be. So imagine how bad the midlife crisis will feel if you did all that. Which this leads us onto the biggest problem with this mindset. When I observed everyone I graduated with, one of the main things I worried about was where their life was going to go. Because if the only thing you did was just game every day or watch Netflix every day, that's going to do something to you. If someone just purely spends their time consuming, do you expect them to live until they're 50? I want you to imagine this for a second. Why do you think they'll end up in the future? When I started to think about this more and more, I started to get terrified because I actually can't imagine someone lasting a long life while doing this stuff. Life is full of challenges, and when you back down in favor of pleasure, you're always going to get the short end of the stick until eventually it's over. So do you want to become like these people? Luckily, I have a way out. You see, this is a mindset, which means it clearly can be changed. So for us, we're going to completely eliminate this mindset by doing this. First, you want a purpose. If you don't know what your purpose is, it isn't hard to find. Think about what your dream pursuit is. Remove all restrictions and just think about it. When you find it, that's going to be your purpose. Now, when you have found your purpose, you should start to put the discipline in working towards it. And eventually, this mindset will erode. Why? Because now we're prioritizing risk-taking over pleasure. Keep never quitting.